scribe! Fetch me my thesaurus! Depredator!
Genius, sir! Genius!
I don't know why we're suddenly at the round table, you know? Like,
That's where Depredator came from. Well, welcome to another episode of the Astro Max Show. I'm Max.
I'm Will.
As always, we are here to talk to you about this beautiful Trek. Today's episode, we are going to be breaking down the DS9 episode, Blood Oath.
Season 2, episode 19.
Damn, way to bring the facts.
Right?
Way to wiki it before the show. We picked this episode coming off of last week for two reasons. One, we were both disappointed last week that we didn't get to talk about Klingons. I think I don't know about all Trek fans, but Klingons are one of the more recognizable alien species from all Star Trek franchises.
Yes. I'm imagining that if you are here and willing to sit through us discussing Star Trek for an hour and a half, however long we go, you've had similar conversations with your friends about Klingons.
We're not torturing anyone.
No, I mean, you're free to leave.
No, you're not. So we wanted to talk about Klingons, and then that led us to the conversation of, like, where do we even begin to discuss Klingons? And we landed on this episode because it has some great references to the original series, while still being in a series that is, I think, maybe less explored than a lot of other Treks. I think DS9 kind of gets sandwiched in that, like, middle child syndrome, because Next Generation was still going on when DS9 aired, and then even at this point in season 2, like, they've already jumped into Voyager. So, like, they forgot, like, DS9 never got to live in a vacuum by itself.
That's true. I mean, that's definitely how it happened with DS9 and myself. You know, it was just like there was always kind of other Treks that I was more familiar with and would kind of rather watch, is how I felt about it at first. Until many years down the line, this guy was like, you need to sit down. Like, it's been, like, it stopped airing like a decade ago. You need to really sit down and watch this. And I did, and I love it, and I watch it all the time now.
Yeah. So Blood Oath, for those of you unfamiliar with this episode or passingly familiar with it, as we mentioned, it takes place in season 2, so it's fairly early on in DS9's development, and you can see where they're going. They set up Klingons. So in this episode, 3 legendary Klingons come to DS9 to fulfill a blood oath that they've taken against a villain who is known simply as the Albino. And we'll break down the Albino a little bit later in the episode, because that's... You come for the Klingons, you stay for the Albino. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that, like, Jadzia Dax's former host, Curzon Dax, was part of this 3 Musketeers. He was the D'Artagnan to these 3 Musketeers.
It was D'Artagnan. It's a great way to break it down.
D'Artagnan.
D'Artagnan!
Oh,
we are saving the king!
Or murder the Albino,
yeah,
whatever.
In this case, it's a slightly different take. But
yeah, so Curzon was this famous U.S. Federation diplomat who he brokered the Khitomer Accords. Is that that's the big treaty that they have with the Klingons?
He was certainly involved, right?
Yeah. Sometimes they give him all the credit for it. DS9 gives him all the credit for it. I don't think any other franchise does. And then, so you start off with this sort of interesting dynamic with Jadzia being like, do I want to join these Klingons? Do I not want to join these Klingons? But before we jump into the Jadzia side of it and start going through these other characters, let's look at these 3. Let's look at our Porthos, our Athos, and our, Aramis? Aramis. That was
our religious zealot.
Yeah, that was Jeremy Irons? Is that his name?
Yeah, I think so.
In Man in the Iron Mask?
Right.
That's a beautiful movie.
Yeah. Just for my entertainment, carrying this metaphor forward, they actually
Leonardo DiCaprio was not in it.
No, that's not what I was after. Unusual for me. But no. Not what I was after you. I was going to say, carrying the Three Musketeers forward, who would be, I mean, D'Artagnan obviously is Curzon.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Aramis is going to be Kang, right?
Okay.
Aramis is Kang. Porthos is obviously
Core
or the Master. Core.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
and then
this sort of drunken.
Yeah, no, and that works. And then Athos is the moody, sullen one that nobody really likes.
Once you said that, I can kind of finding it hard to imagine that, like, in the writer's room as they were writing the script, they didn't already have this in mind.
Well, I was looking at some of, like, the wiki facts on this one, and they're like, oh, they borrowed heavily from, like, the Magnificent Seven and the Seven Samurai, right? Well, I'm like, no. This is the Three Musketeers. Like, you're 3 short for any sort of Samurai 7 going on.
Numerically, that doesn't make sense.
You're also not going somewhere to, like, rescue a village of, like, peasants from pirates or raiders.
No.
I don't think there's pirates in it, but, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever the brigands, whatever the Western equivalent of
Yeah. Right.
Marauders, perhaps.
We'll get to Marauders later.
But alright, so Kang. Or Aramis. He's the serious one of the group. He actually... First, all of these Klingons originally show up in the original series. And this episode kind of decided to bring some of them back. Kang shows up in the episode Day of the Dove, which I vaguely recall. It's got a lot of dark cinematography to it. There's a really cool sword fight scene between Kahless and Kirk at the end. But basically, the Enterprise is stuck next to a, orange light in space that feeds off of negative emotions. And so, obviously, like, the Klingons are also there and feeding off the negative emotions. And Kirk has to convince Kang that, like, we're fighting for no reason. And Kang kind of goes along with that. I don't remember... None of these really set up what their characters become. Like, you never really know about their relationship with Curzon in the original series. You never really know about any of this other stuff going on. Yeah. They're just like the Klingon captain that's there. But all of their episodes ranked rather highly. We'll get to the highest ranked one last. And I actually forgot that I had seen that episode. And I had to come back to that. So we'll jump from Kang over to Core. The Daha Master. The coolest. Outside of Martok, he's the coolest Klingon.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not part of the Federation. So Worf doesn't count.
I don't know. He's
a loophole.
Yeah. I would agree with that ranking.
Because the Son of Moog stands all on his own.
He does.
You can't rank him. But Core is a great character who shows up in 3 DS9 episodes. But he is actually the first Klingon ever in any Star Trek. Is Core. He's in the episode Errand of Mercy. Fairly late in season 1, I think. It's kind of a boring episode, to be honest. But it does have some interesting, like, there's a piece going on between there's a temporary piece. No, the piece has just been demolished between the Klingons and the Federation. So the Enterprise, Kirk, shows up at this, like, backwater planet that isn't part of the Federation, but they're worried about the Klingons taking it for strategic purposes. And it's a fairly, typical, like, low-tech civilization. We're here to rescue you from this evil threat thing. Lots of shenanigans, like, ensues back and forth. And eventually Kirk convinces the human population to, like, side with him. And Core shows up as the sort of governor of this planet. But he's a phenomenal actor when it comes to Klingons. So glad that they brought him back. And then the last one, Koloth, we will spend almost no time discussing his first appearance. Because we were talking about, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen all of those. I haven't seen all of the original series, I don't think. Certainly not in order.
Right.
But many nights of watching late night local sci-fi TV. Svengoolie and then OG Star Trek. But yeah, anyway, so I was like, what? It was Koloth's first episode.
Of course.
It's trouble with triples.
He's that guy?
He's that. He's the captain of that Klingon ship. Is Koloth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Dahar Master is defeated by tribbles, and actually, as it
Look, it is an indignity, right? It's dishonorable, at least on the surface.
dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow, dishonor on your whole family.
Koloth defeated, bested by the tribbles.
Yeah. Well, they do mention that like the entire Klingon Empire, trembles before the tribble.
Yes.
Yeah. So the only redeeming part of Trouble with Tribbles is that later DS9 gets to go back and revisit that episode. Mm-hmm. I stand by that statement. Send me all the hate mail you want. I stand by that statement. And we don't need to talk about Tribbles anymore.
Nope.
So that's kind of where these Klingons come from. Now, where we meet them in DS9 is in a very different space. Because they're no longer great generals of the Empire. Kind of makes sense in Claw's case. Mm-hmm. But they've gone through some great tragedy. Or is it just Kang's son, or is it like all three of their sons?
All three of their firstborns.
All three of their firstborns were killed by the albino.
Yes.
Now, what the albino is remains a mystery, although I'm not entirely convinced Discovery didn't try and tie that up.
Yeah, I'm falling on, in the camp, these sort of fan-held theories that he's Klingon. He's an albino Klingon. He has sort of similar forehead ridges, and I just don't think it's a stretch. I'm going to say Klingon.
Okay.
He falls into this life of piracy and murder and duplicitous dealings, probably just due to being ostracized because of his...
He was bullied, and so he decided to murder the firstborn children of the Three Musketeers.
Yes.
2 and 2 is not making 4 in that equation, but all right. He's a villain. All villains need their motives.
No, so
misguided as they are.
Well, no, so he, Kang, Kor, and Koloth had been sort of chasing him around. Him and his band of marauders. Again, we'll come back to that. And really wreaking havoc with his whole operation. And there was an incident in which they really got the better of him. He got away, vowing revenge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then later on down the road, managed the killing of the three firstborns, and thus the blood oath was taken.
Yes. The Kor, Koloth, Kang, and Curzon Dax take a blood oath to eat the heart of the albino. And so they show up because Kang, after, I don't know, like 100 years, a couple decades, 80 years, has finally found the albino. It turns out he hasn't actually found him. The albino contacts him, but they show up trying to recruit them all. At first, they don't want Jizzy to go with them.
Which I was confused about why they kind of set it up that way. Why did they... Because my impression at first, like watching that episode the first time around, I was like, oh, well, they heard that, Dax's Curzon's next incarnation was living aboard this space station.
Yeah.
Right? And so they wanted to... That's why they chose to meet at Deep Space Nine.
Well, it's unclear to me if they actually know that it's the next Dax.
Yeah, I mean, it is
because like Kang has a line at the beginning, like when he first shows up, he's like, I wasn't sure what I was gonna,
Yes.
How did he die? Like they're not even aware Curzon's dead.
Right. Or if it was just pure coincidence that they decided to meet on Deep Space Nine of all places. And
that's a hell of a coincidence.
Happens to be there, and overhears Odo talking about how he's got this drunk Klingon in prison.
Oh, but all right. We got to back up. We got to talk about the opening scene.
Yeah.
Because you have some great Odo and Quark, like right off the bat.
Absolutely.
It starts with Kor. He's in the Holosuite program, fighting the Battle of Clock Brock or whatever.
Whatever the pronunciation is, that's pretty close.
And Quark's like begging Odo to throw him out. He's like, no, don't open the door.
He's threatened to kill you.
He's like, no, we tried to kill you.
Odo, not as troubled about that.
Yeah. So then you meet Kor, who like comes out of the Holosuite drunk and confused and rambling on about whatever.
Yeah.
And so like Odo's like, the battle is over, the people await your victory, and like throws him in the brig. He's just like lures him away. He's like, let's go get a drink. Tell me about your victory.
And then cut to Kor asleep in the brig.
Yeah. And then Koloth's first appearance. I think it makes up for troubles with tribbles.
Yes.
But, like, Odo just turns around and Koloth's like standing in the middle of the security office.
Yeah.
He's like, how did you get in here? He's like, I am Koloth. And that doesn't answer my question.
Yes. It does.
Like,
it's a beautiful exchange.
It's a great 3-minute entrance to that episode. And then it cuts to the intro, and then you come back and Odo's complaining to Kira about Klingon afternoons. But then, like, there's so many dynamics in there that work. It's got that level of like intrigue and humor and characters playing off of each other that you see DS9 do more and more and more of as the series progresses. What did you think about the way they handle the trills?
Right. So,
Because I feel like we got to start diving into Dax.
we do have to start diving into Dax, which, as you know, I'm somewhat ambivalent about in some cases.
Yeah.
But the Trill culture, the Trill race is fascinating, and I love that they're featured pretty heavily in Deep Space Nine because this idea of the symbiont and the multiple lives sort of stacking experience on top of each other is great, and it's just there's so much there to dive into with a character and to have whole episodes and arcs around these iterations of Dax is really cool. But so a central theme in sort of Trill society, at least for those entrusted with a symbiont, is leaving all attachments from a former life behind. And it's sort of cut and dry. You have to. It's law. It's custom.
They never do, though.
Right, exactly. So on paper, like, it's very clear.
Yeah. Don't get involved with past lives.
Right. But, as any sort of empathic, emotional alpha quadrant species would have difficulty putting that into practice. Like, you've got former lovers just sort of coming and going.
Yeah.
And you're like, I actually still have... You're giving me feelings right now, and I'm having a hard time.
I'm sure when the Trills wrote that law, they're like, no, this is going to protect us from, getting mixed up with previous lovers. Not, oh, well, in the case of 3 old Klingons showing up to your current employer, asking you to go fulfill a blood oath that involves murdering between, 1 and 40 people.
Look, I think there should be that statute.
I think there is now.
Well, Dax definitely wrote them a letter and was like, look, I could not get around this.
I like the way Dax struggles with this, though, because, like, it'd be one thing if she was like, no, the Federation, like, there's not a part of her that's, like, conflicted about her oath to the Federation. Mm-hmm. It's like, can I actually go and fulfill this oath? Can I murder somebody?
Yes, well, that's the thing, right? So she has several conversations with sort of her trusted crewmates that she is used to bouncing these dilemmas off of, So first she goes to Kira and is like, your time as a resistance fighter, I'm sure you had to kill, right?
Yeah.
What was that like? What did that cost you?
She brought that up with no grace, by the way.
No, not at all.
She's like, tell me about the time.
Just in the midst of her bridge duties, she's just like typing up, she's like doing her science stuff, and is like, so, all the people you killed, how many was that? How did you feel?
Kira's like, what?
For a second, like I was like imagining it from Kira's perspective, and it was almost accusatory. It was like, you killed a bunch of people. You know that, right?
Yeah. Like, you are a bad person.
Kira's like, just like, the hell is this coming from?
Like, well, this is a weird Monday.
Very strange.
And then she talks. I love the conversation with Cisco.
I mean,
like after she's already put in her leave, and Cisco's like,
leave denied.
You can't do this. She's like, watch me.
Which is like, I mean, you can't physically restrain me. Right? Whether or not I'm allowed to put this uniform back on and resume my duties is up to you. I'm going to come back. You're going to have to make that call then.
Yeah. I mean, what a hand to play.
Yeah.
And it's So Jadzia Dax is an interesting character because I think early on DS9 is trying to set itself apart from Next Generation by having a really prominent female officer in a different role. Like Next Generation, you get Tasha Yar for a minute.
A hot minute.
Ask Data about a hot minute. In a sort of outside the norm, like in the original series, they were like the communications officer and the doctors. I'm like, they weren't even the doctors; they were just the communication officers. Yeah. And Next Generation, mostly doctors. Tasha Yar for a minute. So to have like the chief science officer be female, I think was a kind of a bold choice for him. But she struggles early on because you also have Kira. And Kira's like the definite badass. Mm-hmm. She's a resistance fighter. She's like a colonel in the army. And then Jadzia's like, I'm good at science and I have 9 lives. So this episode, they kind of start to find a groove for Dax, which is in the instigator role. Like if there's a shenanigans going on, Jadzia's gonna be in it.
Yes, if not at the root of it.
Yeah,
it's true.
She's right there. And in this case, it's let's go off and have a merry adventure. As it turns out, Kang's plan is not for a merry adventure, though.
It's not.
Turns out he's pretty much leading them all into a death trap, and
look. I understand that. So the way they found the albino's location was the albino was like, look, the contact's Kang, and it's like, look, I'm tired of this lifelong cat and mouse that we're doing.
Yeah.
Here I am. This is my planet. This is what my guards look like. Come and let's do this final dance.
Which sounds cool.
It does.
But if you're Kang, like, how do you fall for that? How do you not know that that's
Well, that's the thing. I think he does. I mean, he does know, and that's why he's got this hopeless outlook from the start. He's like, we're not gonna get out of there, but sort of honor decrees, and I'm at the end of my life here. There's probably worse ways to go out than in pursuit, even the hopeless pursuit of this blood oath.
And there's this constant conversation throughout it where they're talking about the change in Klingon ways, right?
Yeah.
And the degrading of Klingon honor. And so I think you're right. From Kang's perspective, he's like, I don't really care if it's a trap. Like, the best I can do on my oath is to die trying to fulfill my oath. Dying as an old man, unable to find the albino, does not get me into Sto-vo-kor.
Right. But what I'm curious about is, the 3, I think they're all Dahar Masters, right? Or is it just Kor? I'm a little confused about that.
Kor is definitely a Dahar Master.
Yes.
There's that first scene after Jadzia bails Kor out of like the brig, and they go and find Koloth, and he's like trying to cut some dessert with a really dull knife, and they're trying to make some really clumsy metaphor about like always practicing your blades.
Yeah.
Which is funny because the choreography is just start to finish in that episode's not good.
Oh.
But we digress. And I want to say right there, he's like, only a true Dahar Master practices their cuts while they're eating.
At all times, right?
At all times.
Yeah.
Kang's the only one that they don't really mention.
We'll speak to that. But in any case, they are all warriors of renown and great respect, and they're revered in the Empire.
Yes.
So what I guess unclear about, and maybe it's just the nature of the Blood Oath, but like why... I kind of have to imagine that even though they don't have probably a lot of political influence left, which is kind of discussed later in the series with a core episode, that they could maybe like raise a call that we have a glorious quest for any warriors who would be interested to join.
Yeah.
And that was never really explored.
Maybe that breaks the rules of a Blood Oath.
Exactly. So there's maybe it's just like it's kind of got to be the 3 of us. Like, we don't want to involve anyone, which is something Kang struggles with over Jadzia's involvement, right?
Right. Well, and as you find out later, like his big struggle is he really just doesn't want to recruit Jadzia to die.
Exactly.
Like he's like, yeah, if it's old man Curzon, sure, I can give him a glorious death, but like I don't know Jadzia. I feel a little guilty about just.
Yeah, like I can understand, like you can explain to me scientifically that you have all of Curzon's memories and experiences, but that you don't feel like Curzon to me. You know, you're in this different body. It just
certainly not enough to ask you to come commit suicide with me.
Right.
So should we jump to the compound? Because I have lots of thoughts about the compound battle scene.
Yeah.
Because up until they actually get onto the surface of the planet, I feel like this episode is holding up pretty well. Like, it's not really dropping the ball anywhere.
No, I feel like at this point, you know, Jadzia is coming along. Kang's resigned to the fact that Jadzia is coming along. Before we get to the compound, there's one scene on the battle cruiser, on the bird of prey, that I want to talk about.
Okay.
And it's that scene where Jadzia is like calling Kang on the fact that he's come to die, right? She can sense that there's this mood in him that death is inevitable. This is his final battle. Not coming back from this, right? So she calls him on it and is like, but why? And then that's when he spills his guts about having been contacted and challenged by the albino, and that there's really no hope of victory in his eyes. Jadzia gets this out of him, and almost immediately is just like applies minor Starfleet junk science. And is like, well, what if we just were all fighting with swords?
Yeah, what if we just level the playing field?
Yeah, and Kang is like, that actually sounds decent.
Yeah. And it's a great Jadzia moment.
It is a great Jadzia moment.
And it's always this fun line that Jadzia walks because she's a warrior. Like, she can hold, like, she goes toe-to-toe with Koloth. Mm-hmm. Granted, it's a 150-year-old version of Koloth, and she loses, but still, like, that's impressive.
Sure.
And then also she has, like, all the things you would want from, like, a Starfleet engineer, right? As, like, that Borda so famously says, like, turn rocks into laser beams.
Rocks into replicators.
Rocks into replicators.
Yes.
Like, they just press a couple of buttons on a keypad, and suddenly...
Yeah, no, she's like...
No phasers.
Float it all with tachyon particles.
Yeah.
And tachyon particles have done so much in Star Trek. And in this instance, they are...
They just shut down phasers.
Nullifying all particle weapons. Love it.
So, but that actually brings me to the first, like, major snafu that I picked out in this episode, because they decide they've shut down all the phasers, they've beamed to the planet, they've decided they need a diversion, right? Like, while 3 of us assault the main gate, 1 of us is going to go blow up the armory. Mm-hmm. And Koloth volunteers to do it, I think. And Jadzia's like, oh, well, you're going to have to run across this clearing in the open, and they could shoot you. I'm like, but didn't you turn off the phasers?
Yeah, I think that was implied that they were vulnerable to fire in that instance. But I don't think she actually says that. I think it's just like, it's a long way to run. I'm faster.
Oh, you think she's just saying, like, you can't run that far? Like, it'll take you... The battle will be over by the time you get back to...
Or even if you manage to do it quickly, by the time you got back, you would be, like, just winded and useless.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, that changes... All right, that's fair. That changes that for me. Because there's even in that scene, like, they go up to the battlements, and you can see her running through the clearing, and they go to shoot her, and they can't shoot, and you're like... Well, duh, you can't shoot. Like, did you really think you were going to get shot running through that clearing?
You released the magic tachyons. Of course they can't shoot.
You have tachyon on your side.
Gosh.
He's solid. He's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me that she's just politely calling them old and out of shape. I thought for sure it was just the phaser fire.
Yeah, I think it's just the running.
But everything from that point forward, like, they blow up the... armory, right? And then they're like running through the compound, and like the guards are like coming up, and they're fighting, and they're running through the explosion. Like, yeah, that's all really cool.
Yeah,
like that holds up as far as like a Star Trek budget.
That holds up just fine
for like maybe it's 94, 95, somewhere in there, something early like that. 90s. Like early 90s. It's good.
It's just fine.
It's just fine. And then they breach. Like the command center
is breaching,
and you meet the albino. The albino.
So once that happened, once like you get that, well, so there's the first visual of the albino, and he's yelling at his security force, right?
Yeah.
The security force, his captain of the guard is like, "No, we're doing this and this," and he's like, "You're stupid. You have to protect the power station." It was at that moment where I was like, the only like context and view we've had of this guy has kind of been as this off-screen presence described to us by Kang, Koloth, Kor, and Jadzia.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I didn't realize that by the time we get to the compound, he is actually already a compelling villain, just in my imagination.
They build him up so well.
They do.
Like he's out. Like you at this point, you love the 3 Klingons.
Yeah.
And you believe, for whatever reason, despite all of the evidence that you can see on screen, that they're great warriors.
Yeah.
And
it takes a suspension of disbelief, but I suspended.
Yeah, you believe that somewhere in the past they were awesome.
Yeah.
And now he's eluded them for 80 years.
Right.
He snuck into each of their houses and murdered their kids. Mm-hmm. He's a man.
Yeah, he's fucking cold.
Megatron would be impressed.
Yes, he would.
But then sadly, I'm glad that the episode ends the way it does, because it's got a great sense of resolution while also still being really sad and all that. But you also never see the albino again.
Right. And I think, which is sad because we just arrived at the conclusion, he's awesome. He's very compelling.
Yeah.
We could have got some mileage off of this guy.
Yeah.
Right?
He would have been such a great, you really want him to be the DS9 version of Harry Mudd. Yeah. Except super evil. Harry Mudd was sort of harmlessly evil. He was kind of funny, Yeah. The albino, there's absolutely nothing funny about that guy.
Exactly. And just a much more sort of cold-blooded killer vibe coming from him. But
I want to see him and the House of Duras team up.
Oh, that would be dope.
That would be, yeah.
It's a natural alliance too. All those underhanded scheming.
Yeah. Or maybe he teams up with the Dominion,
Okay.
Yeah.
Also,
something.
Totally apropos.
Something.
Right. So missed opportunity, in our opinion, and even just within the episode. And I know there's limited time to work with. You got 45 minutes, but just put in some more albino, just more screen time for him, right? I don't know where you fit in exactly, but he would have been great to dwell on more, and so that even his death at the end is just a bit more impactful.
Yeah,
right?
He has one quasi-villain monologue where he's defeated Kang, but Jadzia's there, she disarms him, and then he kind of calls her bluff. He's like, "You're not a murderer. You can't, fine. Cut my chest open. Rip out my heart. Eat it.
Right.
Isn't that what your blood oath says?"
Right.
And but he needs you never know the motivation for why he has this relationship with those 3 Klingons that he has.
It sounds, the way they set it up and the way they try to explain it, it just ends up coming up, it's a little petty, right? It doesn't seem to justify this 80-year blood feud, at least not to my ears. But it's just sort of...
Yeah, it's almost they pulled him over for a speeding ticket, and his reaction to that was "I'm gonna kill your family." It just goes really, it escalates really quickly.
Right, so if you're a marauder operating in Klingon space, amongst all of these Klingon badasses, getting caught and scuttled every once in a while is kind of the cost of doing business.
If you're a what?
Okay. I used the word marauder just now.
You did. It was an excellent use of the word marauder. It's a very good, well-known, easy-to-say word.
It is, in fact. This episode purposely avoided the use of it for reasons passing my understanding. I am usually not sort of an English / grammar Nazi.
Furious about this grammar.
I don't like this word. It isn't... Okay, so backing up, quick flashback to Dax explaining to Kira the nature of this blood oath, right? What happened, what instigated it, what it looks like now, and why she's so torn and conflicted. As she's describing the albino and his sort of gang of thugs, she refers to them as depredators.
Depredators.
And I'm just, it's, those who commit depredation of some kind. Depredation, great word. flows, even has a little sort of dark lyricism to it. Depredation, I love that. Depravity, you can see kind of its roots and offshoots. Depredator is an ugly clunk of a word.
I have a couple more thoughts on this episode. Is a good highlight for it, but it speaks to just DS9 in general, because I feel like we're going to do a lot of DS9 because that's where most of the Klingons live.
Yep.
But it didn't. It's you don't appreciate it when you're in the middle of like a DS9 watch. But last week, having jumped over to Enterprise and watching some of that, and then jumped back into DS9 for this week, there's a stark difference in the lighting between DS9 and I think really most other treks. Like everything on the station itself, it's very dim.
Yeah.
It's dark.
Yeah.
Like you're walking around the halls of like the Enterprise in either Enterprise or in Next Generation, and like everything's very bright. You know. Like you got those nice rugs and it's bright, and then like you jump to DS9, it's like this Cardassian station, and it's dark and oppressive. And we're traveling on this Klingon bird of prey, and it's dark and oppressive.
Right.
And like everything is very confined and packed and low lit. It's a nice aesthetic that just kind of like runs through DS9 to set the tone yet again of like we are out on the front. We are pioneers.
Yeah, I would agree that it is. It's a good follow through that they have, and they do follow through with it. And so since they're good at following through with that, it is able to set these tones for an episode or for a new arrival of a dark species, or a species with dark intentions, I should say, because whenever Star Trek goes to sort of a grim look at anything, like a grim look at the past, when you go to Terok Nor in the past, it is so dark and gray, and like there's smoke machines like behind every bulkhead. It's very like overdone almost, but it's great.
Yeah, that episode where they go to Empok Nor is
right.
That is classic DS9. But you're right. It's like you only only faces are lit up in that episode.
Yeah.
Everything else is just almost.
Yeah. I mean, even Terok, even like Terok Nor, when they sort of do the time jump episodes backwards, and you've got the Bajoran Quarter and like the right. It's all very just like dreary, dark.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a little bit on the nose, but it also works just fine.
It works, and they play off of it a few times. The few times where they have to go to like. I think it's Homefront, like way later, where they have to go back to Earth because like the shapeshifters, and then like you get to Federation headquarters, and it's back to being like bright and cheerful, and then they get back to DS9, and it's like even the Defiant is very poorly lit. People are gonna have problems.
Yeah. Well, they spend
but you're gonna need cortical stimulus.
Yeah. Well, they also spend like a pretty large portion of their time under like red alert. So the lighting changes pretty dramatically.
Thanks, Cisco.
Thank you, Cisco.
Now, the other thing that came up quite a bit when looking at this episode was a lot of critical reviews at the time said it was lacking in power and depth. And at first I had an affront to that. I was like, no, this episode is awesome. Like when they bust through into the compound and they're like, look upon your death, albino. And it's like the three of them and the smoke rising up.
That was dope.
I'm like, what do you mean it lacks power?
Yeah.
But then you think about the two episodes that kind of build out of this, which is Kor's two other episodes in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
The Sword of Kahless and Once More Under the Breach, or something like that.
Something like that. No, it's not Once More Under the Breach. It's I'll think of it.
Yeah, but it's got that energy to it. Those episodes,
they have power
compared to this. Like, how do you think that statement fills up? Because after I look at those other two episodes, I'm like, yeah, okay, this one does lack a little power.
Right. So, and I don't know if this will hold true. Just sort of in later episodes, but in this one, I'm thrown a lot. I found myself thrown a lot by playing the Klingons, just large, expressive personalities off against Jadzia Dax. Didn't have the chemistry I was after, I think. And I don't know that I don't know that that holds true, because of course she is, asked to do that many more times throughout DS9, and I either became accustomed to that or she got better at it. I'm not sure which it is.
I think she gets better at it.
Okay.
I think, well, I shouldn't say like she gets better at it, because I think it's a group effort, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there is a noticeable improvement.
Yeah.
As the show goes on, with her interactions with these other outside of the Federation, like she's playing Tonga with Quark, and like she's just in all of these other things. Because I think in this episode they identify that like that's her path, like that's how she fits in. Because she can't be Kira, right? She can't be, like, what's an example of Lita, right? Like,
no,
she can't be Lita. Like, she's got to be somewhere in the middle. She's got to be a little softer than Kira, but still formidable.
Yeah.
Right? You got as believable as the wife of Worf, Like,
yes.
Like, she's got to be able to marry into the House of Martok and, like, hold her own and, like, live up to the legacy of Dax. And once they start hitting on that, they can practice with it like everything else. You do it more, and you make it
absolutely
work.
Because I think you put the later Dax sort of time warped back into do this episode in say season 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's different.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's a surprise. I think just anyone who's given 5 seasons to develop their character is going to have a different way of operating from season 2 to season 5. It's just going to be different energy.
Yeah,
and that's fine. But I
100%.
think for me, that's kind of where I sensed maybe a slight lacking of depth and power. But I enjoyed the episode immensely. Yeah, that said,
it's a great episode. It struggles from a lot of what early DS9 struggles with. It's just clumsy. That wraps Blood Oath for me.
Oh, I'm wrapped.
I can't. You're wrapped.
That sounds great.
All right, let's go eat from the heart of the albino. I have one in the fridge.
Tasty.
A whole albino, not just the heart. It's gotta be fresh.
Rough.
All right, well, that's gonna do it for our episode. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you just enjoyed this discussion of Blood Oath. Join us again next week as we break down yet more Star Trek. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give us a like, ring the bell for notifications, tell your friends, and if you have thoughts on Troubles and Tribbles, keep them to yourself.